Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In a small Missouri town, nestled among wooded hills and forgotten by the hustle and bustle of the world, the seasons passed slowly, as if time itself had fallen asleep. The streets, lined with century-old trees with gnarled branches, whispered ancient stories to those who cared to listen. There was a heaviness in the air, a silence laden with memories, departures, and things left unsaid. It is in this quiet town, Hollow Creek, that lived Marcus Bennett, a man whom life had too soon forced into the silence of mourning. A former African-American history teacher at a local high school, respected for his rigor and calm voice, Marcus was now only a shadow of the man he had been. 3 years earlier, he had lost Olivia, his wife, his love, his anchor, taken away by a fulminating cancer. Since then, the house they had built together was nothing more than an inhabited tomb. The living room, its walls covered in books, smelled of old wood, beeswax, and silent sorrow. Each object had its place, frozen in time, Olivia's favorite mug still on the shelf, her scarves carefully stored in a cedar box, a photo of them, a young couple in love, perched on the mantelpiece. But no laughter echoed within those walls anymore. Marcus no longer received anyone. He spoke little. His only connection with the world was the letters he wrote to former students who sometimes wrote to him to give him news. He hadn't had children. By choice at first, then by abandonment, later. Because after Olivia's death, any desire to build or pass on something had died within him. He didn't want anything anymore. He was no longer expecting anything. He no longer hoped for anything. Until the day the unexpected literally knocked on his door. That morning, the wind blew with a strange violence, stirring the dead leaves in a chaotic ballet. A storm was brewing, and the inky sky seemed ready to burst. Marcus, sitting in his old rocking chair, was reading a collection of letters from black soldiers from the Civil War. His cup of tea was slowly cooling on the coffee table, and the fireplace crackled faintly. Nothing suggested that his life was about to change at that precise moment. Then, a discreet blow. Not a free kick. More of a plea. Marcus frowned. No one ever came to his house unannounced. He opened the door. And there he saw her. A young black woman, soaked to the skin, her hair plastered to her forehead, her eyes battered but dignified. Her jacket, too thin, clung to her skin. She was holding 2 little boys, identical twins with wide-open eyes, pressed against her. And in a makeshift sling, a third, smaller child slept against her chest, breathing short but peacefully. His lips trembled. His voice was hoarse, almost broken by cold and fatigue. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm not looking for money. Just a dry place for the night." Her name was Jasmine Carter. She had 29 years old, and carried the weight of 1,000 lives on his frail shoulders. For 3 weeks, she had fled a tiny Chicago apartment, a violent and threatening man, a history of fear and screaming. She had taken her children and a few diapers, some powdered milk, 2 worn-out blankies, and a broken toothbrush. She had wandered from shelter to shelter, slept in apartment building lobbies and abandoned cars, praying every day that her sons wouldn't get sick. His children were called Noah, Isaiah, and Elijah, 4 years old. Triplets, born prematurely, each with a distinct personality despite their young age. Noah, the eldest by a few minutes, always protective. Isaiah, dreamy and silent. Elijah, the youngest, mischievous but fragile. And there she was, standing before a stranger, begging for hospitality as one would beg heaven. Marcus stood frozen for a moment. Time seemed to stand still. The children were shivering. Jasmine was about to apologize, to back away, to retrace her steps in the rain. But something in her gaze, in the noble distress she bore, in the silent presence of those 3 little beings clinging to her, awakened in Marcus something he thought was dead. Without a word, he stepped aside and opened the door wider. And simply said, "Come in." This word was a key. A key that opened a door that Marcus himself had not crossed for years. The first days were enveloped in a fragile, almost sacred silence, like a truce between two battered lives. Jasmine, discreet and respectful, spoke little. She walked on tiptoe, even when no one was asleep, as if the slightest noise might break her permission to be there. She cleaned up after every meal, wiped the children's footprints off the floor before anyone even noticed, and tidied their meager belongings in a corner of the living room with almost military rigor. She forbade herself from taking up too much space. As if she had never had the right to fully exist. Marcus, meanwhile, wandered through his own house like a guest in a museum, between the ghosts of the past and the unusual presence of this young woman and her 3 children. He didn't know where to look. The children's laughter, the soft voices in the kitchen, the colorful socks trailing on the floor, all of it was both disturbing and comforting. But he remained withdrawn. They didn't know how to smile anymore. But the children, them, did not know fear. They hadn't known Olivia. They didn't carry the weight of the past. They entered this house as if into a forest full of promise. Elijah, the smallest, became fascinated by the shelves filled with books. Every morning, he would sit cross-legged on the carpet, pick up a book larger than himself, turning the pages with an almost religious slowness. Sometimes, he would point to a word, looking up at Marcus curiously. "What is this, sir?" And Marcus answered, almost without thinking. The words came back. Slowly. Like a forgotten muscle starting to move again. He ran everywhere, tracing imaginary paths between armchairs, corridors, carpets. He laughed loudly, shouted with joy, fell, got up, ran again. He filled the rooms with life. And sometimes Marcus, alone in the kitchen, would find himself smile when hearing it. Isaiah was different. Silent, always one step behind the others. He observed everything. Marcus especially. He stared at him for a long time, without a word. Not with distrust. Rather with the gravity of those who sense what others are hiding. He followed Marcus with his gaze, as if trying to read the invisible story behind his eyes. One evening during that first week, as the rain beat against the windows and the house seemed to be cocooned in warmth, Jasmine prepared a stew. It was nothing extraordinary, a few potatoes, some carrots, a little sauce, a little thyme from the bottom of the cupboard. But she had cooked it carefully, slowly, tasting every step of the way, as if to thank home for being there when she had nothing left. Marcus entered the kitchen, drawn by the smell. He stopped dead in his tracks. The aroma, that subtle combination of simmered vegetables, spices and memories, it was Olivia. He stood there for a moment, his gaze lost in the steam from the dish. Then, in an almost hoarse voice. "My wife used to make this dish, same thing. Same smell." Jasmine froze, spoon in hand. She turned around, hesitant, unsure whether to apologize or remain silent. But Marcus looked up at her. And in his gaze, there was no reproach, no pain. Only surprise. Recognition. Nostalgia. Jasmine smiled at him. Not a fake smile, not a smile of convenience. A sweet, genuine smile, without expectations, as one offers to someone one does not want to hurt. And in that moment, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. That smile didn't try to fill the emptiness he carried. He respected him. It was not an intrusion. It was Ascellent presence, who said, "I see your pain. And I don't want to erase anything. Just be there, beside you." The days stretched slowly, but the initial silence had begun to give way to timid exchanges, longer glances, gestures of trust. One autumn evening after putting the children to bed, Jasmine and Marcus found themselves in the living room. The fire in the fireplace crackled gently. The rain fell outside like a soothing melody. Marcus was reading, but his gaze often slid to Jasmine, who was sitting on the old sofa with a steaming cup of tea in her hands. He felt it was time. And so did she. Without him asking her a single question, Jasmine spoke. Not all at once. Not as a confession. More like a pain finally being let out. "I was 24 when I met him, the boy's father. He was handsome, brilliant, and at first, caring. He made me believe I was unique. Then, slowly, everything changed. His voice was calm, but his hands were shaking. He controlled everything. What I wore. Who I saw. He made me believe I was worthless without him. When I found out I was pregnant with triplets, I was scared. But I also believed it would change him. I hoped. She paused, staring into space. The yelling turned to hitting. The apologies turned to threats. And one day, Isaiah walked in on me in the bathroom, crying silently. He didn't say anything. He just handed me a tissue and whispered, "We can go, Mom." A chill runs through Marcus. That night, I knew I couldn't stay any longer. Not for me. For them. I left with what I could carry. Since then, we sleep wherever we can. But I swore one thing to them, we'd never go back there. Even if we had to sleep on the streets. Marcus was silent for a moment, his throat tight. He didn't need any more details. He understood. He saw in Jasmine not a victim, but a survivor, a lioness mother. A woman who is upright even in turmoil. He put down his book and leaned forward. I never had to run away. But I lost too. Jasmine looked up at him. Olivia. He nodded slowly. She was everything. Strong, brilliant, funny. We had that kind of bond that made everything around us bearable. But, the illness came. Fast. Too fast. Pancreatic cancer. In 3 months, she was gone. And I stayed here, surviving in a house that still smells of her skin, her shampoo, her laughter. His hands were clasped together, tense. He looked away, unable to continue. But Jasmine said nothing. She didn't try to console him, or fill the void with useless words. She just stood there, presence. The silence that followed was not heavy. It was sharing. Little by little, as the evenings went by, they let the walls come down. Marcus discovered that Jasmine loved Maya Angelou's poems and could recite Still I Rise from memory. Jasmine learned that Marcus played the piano but hadn't played a note since Olivia's death. He told how he and Olivia met in a bookstore. She recounted how she had never known sincere love from a man. He confided in her that he had forbidden himself to feel anything, out of loyalty to his late wife. She replied that she had never wanted to replace anyone, only to exist fully. And in these crossed confidences, a sweet truth imposed itself. This unexpected family, who arrived without warning, changed everything. The triplets reawakened in Marcus paternal impulses he thought had died. Their energy, their unbridled tenderness, their innocent questions, all of this struck a chord within him he had no longer dared to touch. And Jasmine. Jasmine embodied a quiet strength, a silent courage, a raw beauty made of resilience and modesty. She asked for nothing. But she offered everything, her attention, her loyalty, her light. In Jasmine's eyes, Marcus didn't feel incomplete. He felt alive. And in the silences that everyone had carried for too long, something invisible but deep was taking root. Months passed, and winter set in with its frosty mornings, its streets white with silence, and its evenings where the house became a refuge. The initial chaos had given way to a form of discreet harmony. Life had regained a rhythm, a breath. Slow, imperfect, but true. Jasmine, determined to rebuild herself, found a position at the municipal library. It wasn't much, a few hours a day at first, but she felt useful. She carefully reclassified the books, organized the children's sections, and gently advised readers. Little by little, she became visible in the eyes of others, and especially in his own. The triplets, for their part, made their return to Hollow Creek Kindergarten. They each had their own little backpack, their rain boots, and their already well-established habits. Noah wanted to be a firefighter. Isaiah observed everything with the seriousness of a little philosopher. Elijah sometimes cried at the separation, but he knew Marcus would come for him. Always. Because yes, it was Marcuswo, every day, went to school at 3:30 p.m. sharp. Thick jacket, grey hat, book in hand while he waited. The children ran towards him, shouting, "Papa Marcus." He had never corrected them. He just let it happen. And deep down, it warmed something he didn't dare name. In the small town, the rumors were rife. A young mother and her children in old Bennett's house? A relationship? An arrangement? Some whispered in the market, others in the church pews. But Marcus, already distant by nature, no longer listened to outside voices. He had learned to discern what really mattered. And it wasn't judgments or gossip. What mattered was children's laughter, the shared meals, the books read aloud in the evening, the peaceful silences on the sofa, the glances that Jasmine and he exchanged without speaking. A winter night, the wind was blowing hard outside, making the shutters creak. The house itself was bathed in a quiet warmth. The children slept, huddled together, their cheeks red with cold, their arms curled up in a star shape over their animal-patterned blankets. In the living room, only one remained, the crackling of the fireplace. Marcus and Jasmine were there, sitting side by side. No television. Just the dim light of a lamp, and that suspended, intimate moment. Jasmine stared into the flames, lost in thought. Then, in a soft voice, almost a whisper, "I never really said thank you. For all of this. For taking us in. For not judging me." Marcus slowly turned his head towards her. She wasn't crying. But her eyes shone with a suppressed emotion, the kind you keep bottled up in your heart for too long. He took a breath, looked at her for a moment, then replied, "You know, Jasmine, I wasn't the one who saved you. It was you who brought me back to life." She looked at him, surprised. But he didn't avoid her gaze. "I was a man buried alive in his memories. I had made this house a mausoleum. And you and the children, you brought back the noise, the movement, the screams, life." A thick silence fell, but it was neither awkward nor heavy. It was charged with naked tenderness, with deep respect. Their hands brushed against the edge of the sofa. Jasmine then placed her hand on his. Slowly. Demurely. And it was there, in that discreet warmth, that Marcus leaned towards her. Their first kiss was light, almost trembling. Not a firework. Not an unbridled passion. More an anchor. A breath of hope. A silent oath. That of two battered souls who had nothing more to prove, but everything to offer to each other. It was not the beginning of a love story. It was the recognition of two hearts that had found each other, not despite their wounds, but because of them. That evening, Marcus's house ceased to be a mausoleum. She became a home. 1 year later, the garden behind the house, this garden that Marcus had not more affected since Olivia's death, which had become a silent place, abandoned, with its wild rose bushes and wild grasses, finally found its colors again. That day he was full of life, joyful shouts, colorful garlands hung between the trees, and children's laughter echoing to the porch. A birthday party, for the 5 years of Triplets, had been carefully organized by Jasmine and the few friends they had made over the year. The old cherry tree, which Olivia loved so much, now wore red and yellow ribbons, and a white tablecloth covered a large wooden table filled with cupcakes, juice, and a cake decorated with superhero figurines. There were neighbors, Jasmine's colleagues from the library, former students of Marcus, parents of students from the kindergarten. And in the midst of this joyful bustle, a blended family stood, beaming. Marcus, wearing a light-colored shirt and a cardigan knitted by a neighbor, held Elijah in his arms, while Noah ran around the chairs, chased by a laughing Isaiah. Jasmine, in a simple but elegant floral dress, smiled one of those peaceful smiles you only forge after weathering many storms. When the cake was brought out, after the singing and laughter, Marcus asked for a moment of silence. He stepped forward, a little moved, holding a raised glass in a trembling hand. All eyes turned to him. And in a calm but grateful voice, he said, "A year ago, I was still living in the shadow of what I had lost. I thought nothing would grow in that house again. Not flowers, not love. But life, sometimes, has secret paths. It brings you back to the light in unexpected ways. He paused for a second, his eyes fixed on the children who were listening to him without understanding all his words, but sensing the emotion in his voice. These are my sons. The ones who awakened in me a heart I thought was frozen. This is the woman I love. The one who taught me that love, true love, replaces nothing, but repairs everything. This is my second chance. And I embrace it with gratitude. For Olivia, who loved me so much. And for Jasmine, who brought me back to life. An emotional silence followed his words. Then applause erupted. And the children, carefree, resumed their games as if life itself had decided to grant them this day of light. 3 years later, Marcus and Jasmine, now married, decided to turn their experience into a life mission. With the help of friends, former colleagues and generous donors, they founded Asmal Local Foundation dedicated to homeless women and mothers, to offer them a roof, psychological support, training, and a community. They called him Olivia's Shelter. A name full of meaning. In homage to one who had once loved Marcus unconditionally, but also to symbolize the invisible chain between women who save lives without always knowing it. Olivia had been Marcus's first love. Jasmine, the rebirth. The center opened in a renovated old building, decorated with warm touches, children's drawings, colorful cushions, books on each table. A place of hope, of healing, and especially of dignity restored. Jasmine held a writing workshop there for women in transition. Marcus sometimes gave talks on history and resilience, wisely blending past and present. As for the triplets, they grew up in the midlife, two solid and loving figures. A courageous mother, who had taught them never to lower their heads. And one good man, who, one stormy day, had opened his door to the unknown, and his heart to the unexpected. They did not grow up in luxury. But they grew up in love, memory, and example. And no gold in the world could equal that.